Hey everyone!
Hi.
God bless you!
How you guys are doing?
Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation.
Yes.
Whoop whoop!
Another day.
So excited for today. If you had a chance to look at our Motivational Monday video, then you know that today we're going to be talking about communication.
Cheers.
Cheers. If you don't have your coffee or tea or whatever it is that you like to drink in the morning, please pause the video, go get your beverage, grab a notebook and something to write with, and let's get into it.
Yes.
Communication is super important. It's actually the number one key to having a successful relationship. We are constantly communicating, whether it's through our body language, our tone, or our choice of words. We're always sending out signals of information to other people. And the way that they receive it is also important, and it's also a part of communication as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you go into like a mountain and you lose the signal or you lose the contact with the person. You're like, oh my God, hello, what's going on? Hello, I can't hear you. Hello. It's kind of like trying to communicate with somebody. It's almost like a different language. Like if you're speaking Chinese and I'm speaking Spanish and we like,
Missing each other.
We just like, yes. And the other person's like, okay, what's going on? So it's kind of like it.
I kind of like that example, like thinking about differences of languages, and we can definitely speak from that place in an authentic way. I know I can definitely speak to that experience coming into even just when we got married. A lot of his family members don't speak a lot of English, that some of them speak Spanish, and so it's very easy to miscommunicate when you don't understand the words, right? The choice of words that are being used, which is one part of communication.
Yeah.
But there's been times where, for example, his mom might have said something and I'm thinking it's like one thing because I don't know what the word is, but she said it with a certain tone.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking but then I'm thinking it might be a bad thing, but I don't know. So it's really funny how that experience kind of works, and just to see the different parts. I'm here not understanding the language, but I'm trying to read body language. How is this person's body language? What is that communicating to me? What is their tone? Yes. Are they joking in this moment? I don't know what these words are saying. But it shows that there's so many different aspects to communication.
Yeah, and I like that example because, see, just because you know a little bit of the language, sometimes it's hard to read the body language, right? Mm-hmm. So an example was like when I just came to this country and I try to understand people, like the little areas that I knew how, or hello or this or that, and it was hard because it's not just body language, it's their tone, it's the way they present it, it's the way they put it at the table, and you have to kind of be like, oh, okay. So yeah, communication is so important.
You could walk into a room, right? And if you're not the most confident person, mm-hmm. or you're struggling with self-esteem, you can walk into a room where people are speaking a language and assume, oh, they're laughing at me, right? You're like, wait, why are you thinking this? And again, it's a breakdown somewhere in the communication.
Yes. And so,
have you experienced that?
Yes.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, definitely. There was a time where I was in the train New York City, and then I was going and people were just talking in English, and then I heard my name, and then I heard another word. I'm like, they're probably speaking about me. I'm like, do I know that person? And it felt like they were speaking at you because they were staring at you. Maybe she was just complimenting on my hat, or maybe she was complimenting on my book bag,
or talking about somebody with
the same name. But communication, it just goes really in depth.
Yeah, and it can definitely, and when it doesn't go accordingly, or things aren't communicated well, it can definitely lead to some hurt feelings and confusion and misunderstanding. I know that we went through that a lot. I'm not fluent in Spanish, but I know enough to kind of understand conversations and things. but I've definitely had that, especially starting out, like not understanding certain things. But it just goes to show you how important communication is and how there's different parts of communication, right? Our body language communicates something. We're always communicating. That's one thing. Like, don't ever think you're not communicating, because you're always communicating, whether it's through your body language, whether it's through your tone. Like, there's times where I'll say something in a certain way and he's like, why do you have that kind of tone? And I'm like, what tone? Like, I don't sense a tone. But that tone communicated something to him. Even though to me that wasn't what I was maybe intending to communicate, it still sent a message. And that's what communication is, sending a message.
Yeah. And it's a signal. It's like your Wi-Fi has to be connected in order to work. So like we have to be communicating correctly. We have to connect each other in order to work. And communication is one thing, and then it goes to deeper connection with your words. And
words are huge.
And words are huge. And I don't know exactly what word, but Jesus, I don't know the scripture, the exact passage, but Jesus says that we hold the life and death in our tongues. And that's pivotal too, but it's very important to understand that, because I can give life to my wife or death to my wife.
With the words
that I use.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And that goes along with Ephesians 4:29, and which is really helpful when thinking about communicating, especially in the midst of conflict, because that's the hardest part, right? Because you have to not only get your body to be in order and in check with everything that's happening, you're breathing when you're getting frustrated, like calm down, relax, like try as hard as you can to communicate, because there's times where I'm feeling flustered and it has nothing to do towards my husband, but I'll come to him and I'll be like, did you do this? Can you get this? Can you? And I'm like, he's like, you're going so fast right now. Like, breathe. But then it can come off as that frustration going to him, and that's not what I was intending to communicate, but it still communicated that. And so Ephesians 4:29 says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. So I think the biggest question is to ask, like, well, what do you need in this moment when you're communicating with someone?
Yeah, and it's very important, because it's kind of like the love languages. You know what I mean? Like, each person has their own needs and they're all different. Like an example, me, I'm quality time. I love the quality time and I love being affirmed. And then my wife is like gifts and
acts of service.
Yeah. And so totally different ways in how we feel love. And obviously those are not the only places where you can feel love. You can feel love in all of them in some different type of ways in different seasons. But definitely it's very important.
Yeah. And I think we should definitely get into what we have termed 5 principles for communication.
Yeah.
I think the number one principle is to have a goal.
Yes.
You should always have a goal for your communication. A lot of times people go into a conversation, especially like important ones, without a goal.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen? You're going to be aiming and shooting all over the place, right? Yeah. But when you have a goal, your goal should be 2 things. One, it should be to connect, to keep the connection. So think about your choice of words, or what, like, how you're saying what you're trying to communicate. Yeah. And is that going to preserve the connection you have with this person?
Yeah.
Or make it better? If it's not, then it's probably not going to be beneficial for your communication. The second part of that goal is you don't have to necessarily agree with the person, but you should seek to understand the person. So your goal is connection and understanding.
Yeah. And that goes a little deeper too. Connection and understanding. Like all relationships are built like with people and with God, right? In order to love God, like we must love ourselves first, and then people, and then God. And the communication with God has to be better. That's like probably the most important one on this earth. And so in order to build like that deep communication with our spouse, we must build a deep communication with God in order to build a deep communication with ourselves, and then build it with a spouse. Because like we can't give something that we don't have, you know? Like, so the communication between me and God has to be really strong in order to have strong communication with myself and like what's going on inside. Like if I come after work and I'm feeling upset, and I gotta be able to communicate it to my wife and like, babe, I just had a bad day today. My boss was just not being cool with me today. And I'm just being real. My boss was not being cool, or this coworker was acting up, and he was not being nice today. And I gotta be able to communicate that. So when she gets home, she gets mentally ready. She's like, okay, like what do I have to do in order to help him in this situation? If I come in the door and I'm really upset, and then I'm like, okay, like this, like I have to be able to communicate that. I have to be able to be like, hey, listen, this is how I'm feeling.
I guess we can go to principle 2, which would be communicate what's inside of you, and not what you think is inside of others. Yeah. And that is so important. So kind of like you were saying, it's your responsibility and it's my responsibility to communicate what's happening in my inner world. So if I'm frustrated, if I'm angry, if I'm feeling anxious, nervous, sad, depressed, or even if I'm feeling joyful or super excited, right? Like those are also feelings. And we always go to the negative, but we have positive feelings too. We can communicate and spread that to other people. That's wonderful. But there is this other aspect of communication where we need to communicate what's inside of us and not place the judgment on another person, where we're, saying, oh, well, this is how I feel, and I feel this way because this is what you feel, or this is what you think, or this is what you're doing. Because then you're just acting in judgment towards the other person, and you're not actually saying what is going on inside of you. You're kind of just saying like, I'm upset, but it's because of what you're doing, or it's because of you. And that actually doesn't allow us to take responsibility for our own thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Yeah, and one more thing, just want to add to this, is we are responsible for our own world. Like, we're not responsible for, I can't be responsible for my wife's behaviors, or she can't be responsible for mine. I'm supposed to have self-control and, exercise that. And so I'm going to be able to control my world. And I can't just blame my wife, like, see, you made me get angry, or you made me act like this, or you made me do this. No, that's just not the truth. And the truth is that there's something going on inside. Something that is triggering me inside, that is coming outside, and I'm looking for a target. And so, that's very important.
Yeah, and that goes into the third principle, which is don't tell others how they must change in order to meet your own needs. So, we're not really, our focus of this conversation really isn't needs, but we have needs. And the highest form, there's levels of communication. The highest level of communication is when we're actually able to communicate our needs. So there's usually, there's 5 of them typically. And the first one is cliches, right? So that's where it's like, how you doing? How's it going? How was your day?
Good.
What's up? Like questions that are so surface level that it doesn't even begin to break the ice.
Yeah.
And then you have facts. So it's like, did you know that this law just passed? Or did you know that it's going to rain later on today? That's like that second level of communication. Again, you're not being vulnerable. You're not sharing anything quite yet. Third is opinions. Well, I think this or I think that. So now you're kind of testing the waters a little bit of your vulnerability, like, because you now have the ability to be rejected based on the opinion that you're sharing. That next level is feelings. Like, okay, I feel frustrated, I feel happy, I feel whatever the feeling is. Because now you have that ability where you're actually stepping into trust a little bit more. Because now I'm trusting to share my feelings with you here. And then last but not least, you have needs. And this is what we were coming to, that point in your most intimate and personal relationships needs to be able to communicate what you're needing in that moment. And sometimes it's hard to identify. Yeah,
it's hard, especially for a man. We tend to really not be in our feelings, and especially because of this generation and how it is taught, and how people kind of like model for men. Like, men are supposed to be like, you're not supposed to show your feelings, you're not supposed to show your emotions. You're supposed to be a tough guy, don't cry if you fall. And so that's not the reality. The reality is God made us with feelings. Like, we all have feelings. And so we're supposed to get in touch with them and communicate them properly. I can't just be to my wife and be like, just thinking in my head, like, I hope she gives me coffee because I really want coffee right now. That's just not true. The reality is, like, hey babe, I'm really in a mood for coffee. Can you make me some coffee, please? And she has two options. Either say, listen, I'm kind of tired right now, or yes, baby, I got you. And so that's a healthy way to communicate your needs. You can't just expect somebody and to just be like, hey, so.
Well, that's kind of jumping into the next one, which we're going to get into in a second. So kind of got a little preview of that.
Yeah.
But just going back to this other point, you don't, like, not to tell others how they have to change in order to meet your needs. That's something I did a lot early on. And there was times that you did that as well. There were times where, I would say, I'm feeling really anxious. And I'm feeling anxious because you're always doing this. And if you would stop doing this, I would stop feeling anxious. But the truth is that my anxieties, yes, there are factors that are implementing or having that trigger come up. But the truth is that my anxiety is my anxiety. It's not Patrick's anxiety. It's not the baby's. It's nobody else's anxiety but my own.
Yeah.
And so I've partnered with it, right? And so only I can break partnership with it, right? Through the Lord, but only I can do that. Patrick can't do that for me. So the thing is, you want to look at that as a blessing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm grateful now that I'm triggered. Yes, I'm grateful that I'm anxious. Why? Because now I know something's wrong, right? There's some kind of unease in my body. There's something happening here that's showing me there's a part of my heart that needs healed. There's a part of my heart that needs surrendered. And I think that is the greatest gift, is recognizing that part of it.
Yeah.
And then taking that information, which is like gold, right? It's valuable information. Taking that information and then being able to communicate it to my spouse. Like, I'm feeling anxious, but what I'm really in need of in this moment is reassurance. Now you just went from level 4 to level 5 in your communication. So by me communicating what I'm in need of in that moment, right, that opens him up to be able to say, okay, baby, how can I help you with that? You need reassurance? Let me reassure you. We're going to be there on time. Like, it's going to be okay. I know you're feeling a little nervous. I'll make sure not to drive too fast, right? Like, that opens up more opportunity than me saying, we're always late because of you and you make me anxious and you need to stop being late because when you're always late, then I'm always getting anxious. I didn't solve anything at all.
Just went in a loop.
I just went in a loop, a rant, and I made myself more anxious.
Yes.
But then, we're kind of getting into the next one, so you can, I guess, take this one a little bit more because he was going this direction about number 4 is don't expect others to know your feelings or thoughts.
And like I was saying, yes, it's kind of like a genie. Like, you expect them to know. And me and my wife had to learn. And we kind of like, I hope he brings me that gift that I always wanted. Or I hope she makes me coffee because I'm hungry. I'm really wanting some coffee right now. And so I think we got to communicate those needs, and we got to go a little in depth, and we got to be vulnerable with that. And just say, baby, hey, listen, I'm really in need of a massage or coffee, or I just need to go to the store because I'm not feeling well. That just to communicate, or even just like if it's something that you want, like, hey, babe, I always wanted a microphone, and maybe if we get a chance, we can save up for it and buy it, or whatever it is, just to communicate it and be vulnerable about it with the communication. principle 4: don't expect others to know your feelings and thoughts, and you just have to communicate that and be vulnerable about it, and just let them know what is your needs, what are you in need of, and communicate, and just don't expect them to know, just communicate it, and then if they communicate it, you can validate them and just be like, oh, I understand, and I'm here, and I'm sorry that you're going through that, I'm sorry that you have that need, and how can I help you in that area? So yeah,
I think this is kind of tied to expectations, and I think the way that you can know if there is kind of like an expectation this person should know how you're feeling or thinking is saying, oh, well, he should have known that was going to bother me, or she should have known that I was in need of this.
Yeah.
And the truth is that most of the time as human beings, we're more self-thinking than we are of the other person.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I think it comes from a place of innocence. Like we kind of just think like, okay, what am I needing? What do I want? Like what's going on with me in my world? And it's less sometimes our primary, I don't think, is to think of the other person or what they're feeling or thinking. And so it's funny though, because then it almost seems kind of like selfish in thought to say like, this person should know this. Like, of course they're not going to know that, right? Like they don't know your inner parts of your heart. Only God knows that. And only you know what's happening. And even you don't know your whole heart, right? Like that's why we need the Lord to show us, because there's hidden parts of our heart that we don't understand.
Yeah.
So, that's really good.
Yeah, it is. And let me go back to the lower part, like communication with the lower, and that's where God reveals our heart, and so we could communicate it to the Lord, and then when we communicate that to the Lord, we're able to communicate with people and with ourselves. And then at that moment, you're telling Lord, I'm in need of this, or this is going on. You're getting vulnerable with God. And the same vulnerability that you get with God on your knees and you just pray with God, and you communicate the same way with your spouse and just get vulnerable with them and just say, babe, I'm in need of this and I'm in need of that. Or this is what I'm sensing.
Yeah, that's so good. The last one, number 5, is respect. Respect is so important. So whenever those accusations start flying, like, you don't care, or you just want to see me sad, or those kind of accusations start happening, or the conversation starts to get disrespectful and your language becomes colorful.
Yes. Colorful.
Then you need to cut it. Seriously, like, when you don't have to engage in disrespectful conversation. I've learned something so valuable recently, especially in marriages, and that's bait. Whenever you start hearing those accusatory statements towards people in your life, friends, family, spouse, coworkers, whatever, that's coming from the father of lies, who is also the accuser of brethren. And especially if you're in the faith, your spouse is in the faith, the enemy works even harder to accuse your spouse to you. Yeah. And when you don't catch that thought and you let it fester and sit there, it eventually becomes word vomit.
Yes.
Or it becomes action, right? Where you're just walking out, you're slamming the door, you're screaming, you're doing whatever. And it's little bait that we take. And it's like, yeah, you know what? He did do that on purpose. Yeah, you know what? He doesn't care about me. Meanwhile, he's just maybe trying to calm down, or she's just like, I don't even know how I'm feeling. I just know I need to talk, and I'm feeling like there's no one to talk to. So, what are some, tips that we can give to the people watching that could help them to maintain respectful conversations?
It depends though. So if you're in a place of two frustrated couples, if you were the wife and the husband, you guys are mad frustrated, the best thing is just separate and just get your mind clear and then come back. And another thing, if you guys just cannot get to a point, you keep trying and you're not getting somewhere. I heard this from my old fella, and he said, just talk about something else. Just have a different conversation. I mean, obviously, if you guys can't have a conversation at that moment, just, separate for a little bit and then come back. And whoever is just feeling more calm, just kind of like he said, just bring him a coffee, something that he or she really likes, and just be like, here, baby, I hope to talk to you soon. I love you. And so just little stuff like that, just little gifts or affirmations, or just cooling off and then coming back. So those are big ones for us. And,
yeah, and I think what's also important is thinking through, like, when you're feeling especially misunderstood in a conversation, it is very important. I think if we can learn to function in communicating at those higher levels, like level 4 and 5, like feelings and needs, then there's lower risk of miscommunication, because you're saying, this is exactly what I'm feeling right now, and this is exactly what I'm in need of. But as Patrick was saying earlier, it takes some inner work. Like, you have to actually sit down and figure out, like, what am I feeling? What am I in need of? And then go and communicate that thing, because it's going to actually reduce the chance of miscommunicating. And leading to misunderstanding and hurt and all those other things. Which is super important. So I think that would be really helpful, just in thinking about how to communicate and how to communicate effectively when it comes to this area. But you also said something that I thought was very key. And you said about taking that time to separate. And separation is good for a moment, right? Like, I need to take time to calm down and cool myself down. If you come from a background of a broken home, if you come from divorce, or if you've experienced a lot of fighting between parents that ultimately led to a separation, it is so important, whether it's your wife or your husband, whoever it is, it's so important. I cannot stress this enough, that you reassure that person that you love them and that you're there and you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, that's big.
Love and commitment, to reaffirm that is so important in an argument, because even if the argument to you might not seem like it's the end, for somebody who's had parents who've separated or have left, that argument in their mind could mean losing the relationship.
Wow, that's big. And
so I can't express to you enough how important that is. If you've ever been in an experience where, like, the other person's so triggered and they just won't walk away from the situation, or they like push you away, then they're like running after you, like, where are you going? Why are you leaving? Like, a lot of that abandonment and that rejection and all of that comes from having parents who have maybe divorced or split up. So any fight in their mind could mean the end of your relationship, and that's so key.
Yeah, it's very important to communicate. Even if you're like mad, whatever, just say, listen, I just need some couple minutes. I love you. I'm on your side. I'll be back. And sometimes it's hard to say that at the moments when you really, but just communicate something, assuring them or securing them, or even just like, I just need some time. Please, I'll come right back to you and talk to you in an hour. So it's definitely, communication's definitely so important in a marriage, that sometimes the enemy uses people or uses things or distraction or whatever to take down the lines of communication down.
That's true.
So when the lines of communication are down, there's no more communication, kind of like telephone in a mountain where you lost signal and then you can't communicate. And that's where a lot of arguments happen, or a lot of fights happen. And so try to stand with the lines up and communicate, and look for every chance and every moment to communicate, and just make that your priority.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I know we're going to wrap up here in a little bit, but I was just thinking also about the analogy that he's giving about this mountain and you're driving. But think about also a GPS, right? If in your communication you don't have a goal or a destination, you're going to be all over the place. But what happens is when those lines of communication go down, it's almost like losing a GPS signal. You're like, where are we going now?
Yeah.
And you can end up in a ditch, or you can end up arriving to your destination safely, or rerouting, right? Exactly. Like you see this now? You see where this could go, right? So there's so many different directions that it can take. But if you have that shared goal of, okay, our idea here is to be respectful of each other, to preserve, to reach a level of understanding. We may not agree, but I want to understand you.
Yes. That's
important, right? And I want to be there to help in meeting those needs to the best of my ability as your spouse. Of course, God meets our needs first, but we do have that to meet each other's needs.
Yeah. And I just want to mention this. There's 3 types of needs. There's your self needs, there's your spouse needs, and there's God needs. And the most important one is God meeting your needs. And then your spouse has your basic needs, and you have your basic needs. So there's just like a whole trinity type. Yeah. So I guess that's the most important thing.
Yeah. And the last thing we'll leave you off with is just also listening is a big part of it, of our communication.
Yes, that's big.
So it's not just talking, it's not just our body language, our tone, but it's also on the other end. The Bible tells us to be careful for how we hear. So somebody can be communicating something, but give the person the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
If they're communicating at those lower levels and it may be coming off in judgments and all these other things, if you have the ability to be the water in the fire and just give them grace.
Yes, give them grace.
And there's going to be times where you're going to need that grace too. And, you hope the other person will also give you that grace. But give grace, right? Like, they're hurting, obviously. They're not able to fully communicate. Yeah. I think people do the best they know how to do. And they're doing the best they can in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is the last thing I'm going to say. And the Bible says that we hold the power of life and death in our tongue. So, like, if you can see it, like how our society is looking and how the new generation is going, a lot of the words that you hear in the radio, a lot of words that you hear in the television, they're usually negative words. Usually at the news, all you hear is just negative. And if you inhale too much of that, you're going to become what they want you to become. So my biggest advice to men is try to unplug from the phone, from news, from sports, from everything, and make communication with your spouse your sport. Because
I like that.
Because
your sport.
Because what is gonna happen is when you communicate very well with your spouse, you're gonna later on gonna be able to have that. Because when the spouse feels secure and when she feels loved, she's gonna have the best interest at heart for you. And then you're gonna be able to be like, okay, I'll be back, baby. I'm gonna go play football or basketball or soccer. And she's gonna allow you because she feels loved and appreciated.
That's so good.
Yes.
Make communication your sport. That should be your hashtag. Hashtag make communication a sport. Woo!
Your bumper sticker.
I just want to leave you off here with Proverbs 18:13. The Bible says to answer before listening, this is folly and shame. And so when you're in those moments of communication, don't be listening for the next thing you're going to say.
Yes.
But really intently listen to the person and do exactly what Patrick just did. As I'm talking, he's shaking his head. He's affirming he's hearing me.
Don't stop communicating. When I discovered it, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Yeah.
Don't stop.
Don't stop.
You never stop. You're always communicating.
Yeah.
Be aware of it.
Yes.
No.
Yes. Well, guys, we will see you in the next episode.
Yes, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and subscribe at raising.jacob on Instagram.
Yes.
For inspirational quotes and updates. And look out for Monday morning motivation. See you there.
So let's start with what is communication?
What is communication?
So communication is something so important so vivido and so
Pivotal.
yes. What's that word?
That's not a word.
Shoot.
Do you mean pivotal?
Pivotal.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Communication is so important that if you don't communicate properly.
Probably. Probably.
Probably.
Okay. You ready? Okay. Oh yes, right. Okay. Work out your jaw. Stretch out your jaw.